In today's video, I'm going to be reviewing Elden Ring and what I learned as a new player. So I wanted to do something different with my review than I've seen in other reviews that work to convince me to play this game. As my first review, I'll try my best to articulate my points and share with you what I liked about playing Elden Ring as someone who's never played a Dark Souls or FromSoftware game before. And that's mostly because of their reputation of being ridiculously hard. So let's go ahead and get into this. As I said, I've never played a Dark Souls game before, though I did try Dark Souls 3 for about 10 minutes before I got distracted and never picked it back up again. I gave up on the game because I just got my PlayStation 4 and there were a lot of other games at the time that I wanted to play instead. I didn't even realize that it was a hard game since I played it for just long enough to kill maybe one or two enemies. I always meant to return to the game, but I never got around to it. But the more I heard about the game's difficulty, the less and less I felt like giving it another shot. To me, I just wasn't interested in playing an overly hard game. Then along came Elden Ring. I remember seeing the trailers for the game and saw that George R.R. Martin was involved with the story and was sort of turned off. Since A Song of Ice and Fire hasn't been finished, I'm a little reluctant to support the other projects George has decided to work on instead, but that's a topic for another video. To be honest, after seeing the trailer, I just kind of forgot about it. That is, until the day before the game was released and everybody was going crazy, posting how excited they were, and a lot of friends talking about it, and 2 weeks after the game came out, I had seen so many positive reviews, I became intrigued. That mixed with the bitching from other game developers trashing the game's design, I knew I had to see for myself what was up, especially since some of the people complaining worked at Ubisoft. I was well aware of the reputation these games have and the phrase "GIT GUD", which I do want to admit always kind of made me laugh. I was also impressed when it was announced that after a few weeks of release that they had been very successful and had reached 12 million tarnished. I can say that I was happy to see the game have so much success, given that a handful of AAA games released several months prior, all of which were in various states of disarray, whether that be lacking content, being full of bugs, or just completely unfinished. I'm looking at you, Halo, Call of Duty, and Battlefield. At the very least, I was glad that fans were given what they deserved, respect, and a good product. I truly wanted to know if I was up to the challenge and if I too could become Elden Lord. Turns out I was, and it wasn't as bad as I would have thought. Since I already had the expectation that it was going to be a difficult game, I embraced the challenge head on and didn't care too much how often I died at the beginning. After the first 10 hours, I had learned enough that I wasn't getting killed all the time, and I began to take on challenges more aggressively. I had time to explore the world, learn what types of weapons I enjoyed, and most importantly, how to build my character so life wasn't so miserable when I went off to face the many optional bosses in the opening area of Limgrave. The most important thing I learned is that these games are beatable, and you can learn how to play them. It took a much larger investment of time than most games, but there was something about the challenge that made it very compelling. I completely understand that games with such a high learning curve can be a turnoff for some people, but I'm glad that the game was designed the way it was and didn't give into the insistent bitching that they had to add an easy mode. To be honest, if you're not willing to invest in the game, it's not for you. I will go into this topic a little later on in this review, but I think it's important to note the level of difficulty before I introduce the most important lessons I learned from this game as a new player and someone who hadn't ever really beaten or played a Dark Souls game before. Here are the most important things I learned from Elden Ring. First, I learned that Souls games are hard because they require genuine effort from the player. They require patience and critical thinking. You have to learn how your enemies move, not spam buttons and take your time fighting even the simple mobs. Be observant and willing to explore. You need to be willing to try something new, make mistakes, and oftentimes die as a result. Then learn from those mistakes and keep moving forward. And you have to keep repeating this process over and over. Every time I entered a new area or encountered a new set of enemies, again I had to learn how they moved, take my time, be observant. When I died and made mistakes, to learn from those and keep moving forward. And I did find that I got better as I went, and at the end of the day, You need to get good. Just embrace the meme and face the fact that in the beginning you're going to die a lot. And you're going to keep dying a lot throughout the entire game. And after, some time, you're not going to suck so bad and you're not going to die as often. On the topic of dying, let's move into the next topic I want to cover, the first boss fight in Elden Ring. So I like to think of this as the Margit problem. Is Margit too hard of a boss for the first boss? Yes. But what I had to learn to beat him fundamentally changed how I began to play the rest of the game. I had played about 10 hours before I found Margit. In part, that was because I'm stupid and I just rode around on Torrent, found the maps as I explored Limgrave, Caelid, and Lernia, all the while testing my skills against different mobs. I also got my ass handed to me by a couple bosses I stumbled into that weren't even core story bosses. So, that was a little humbling. However, Margit is also optional. You don't have to beat him. You do have to beat him to defeat Godric, and he technically is the first story boss you find in the game, but you can move on if you want to. As well, there are a good deal of other optional bosses in Limgrave that can help you get better at the game and will reward you with new weapons, items, and abilities. Margit is a wall, but a good one. Since he was such a challenge, I changed my approach drastically and got better at the game as a result. I got better at the game from the time I found Margit and beat him than I had in the other 10 hours I'd already played. As soon as I beat Margit, I thought I was hot shit. I beat the Tree Sentinel, most of the Limgrave optional bosses, and the 2 Evergold boss fights. Then, for whatever reason, after almost killing Godric the first time, it took me another 12 tries to beat him. I felt like a noob again, and was wondering if I was actually good at this freaking game. But I didn't get frustrated, in fact, I just kept getting better. It was after I beat both of these bosses and started progressing further into the game that I started to actually get good. I wasn't spamming my attacks. I learned how to use the Ash of War, which I should have learned much earlier. I learned how to level my character and what items I could use to my advantage. I had played Elden Ring for almost 20 hours at that point and was just barely starting to understand how the game makes it easy for you if you let it. You just have to take the time to learn how to take advantage of everything the game has to offer. There are some hardcore gamers who say that if you use a summon, you didn't really beat the boss. I can see where they're coming from, but the game gives you options for a reason. I decided that I wouldn't summon actual players to help me, but NPC summons were just fine. By the end of the game, I wasn't even using those either. I didn't feel like I needed to. The great thing about Elden Ring is that there's no right way to do something. You get to choose the character build, weapons, and other tools you want to use. This gives you a ton of variety, and I think it is the easy mode. It's hidden in the game design instead of being a button you select in the menu. Another thing about the difficulty for the boss fights is that you can decide to leave, then come back later when you are either better at the game or have found new equipment, spells, or skills that make the fight easier. From my playthrough, both ended up being the case. I would get better at the game, and new equipment I would find would also make the fight a little bit easier or less challenging. By the time I reached the Red Wolf of Radagon, I killed it in the first try, and it only took me 2 tries to kill Renala. I may have been slightly over-leveled since I spent quite a few more hours playing the game and finding optional bosses to beat before I even made it to the Academy. From there, some bosses took a few tries, others I had a much harder time with. For me, it was definitely the Draconic Tree Sentinel and the Godskin duo, those damn bastards. At times, as I progressed through the game, I would hit a wall and had to get better. The thing about Elden Ring is that you can't give up. Anyone can beat this game if they give themselves enough time and are willing to keep learning. This leads me to the next point, and perhaps the most important one if you want to beat this game. Things are not handed to you. As a player who hasn't played too many open world games outside of, Oblivion, Skyrim, and Horizon Zero Dawn, I wasn't at all ready for what Elden Ring had to offer. For more experienced players of the Dark Souls games, it would probably be a lot easier to pick up, and now that I have finished Elden Ring and have started Dark Souls for the first time, I'm finding the challenge much more surmountable because of my experience. Don't get me wrong, it's still hard, but I have a greater sense of what the hell I'm doing, that it's what makes the difference. As I mentioned before, the best part about Elden Ring's boss fights is that if you are having a hard time, you can go somewhere else, get better equipment, level your character, or try another challenge. Then you can come back and try again. So you're not beating yourself against a wall over and over until you get through that boss. The next part that I wanted to cover is some of the criticism that was leveled against the game about bad UX and UI design. There was a tweet from a few other developers that criticized Elden Ring for its UX UI design choices. To be honest, I'd heard of these terms as someone who has, built a few websites. They are terms I should have known a lot better than I did. And for those of you who may not understand what these terms mean, but have heard them before, here are the quick definitions I pulled from Google. So what is UX? UX stands for user experience, or the interaction and experiences users have with the company's products and services. And what is UI? UI stands for user interface and is the series of screens, pages, and visual elements, like buttons and icons, that enable a person to interact with a product or service. So both UX and UI are considered to be important for video games, obviously. I would say that there have been major improvements over the years in both UX and UI, which has increased the quality of gaming in general. However, when it pertains to Elden Ring, there have been some criticisms leveled at the game by other developers, and here's an example of the tweets that were, levied against Elden Ring. So one of them is the fact that Elden Ring scored a 97 Metacritic is proof that reviewers don't give a flaming poop about game UX. My life is a lie. There's a reply, nor PC graphics, stability, and performance, apparently. And the final one is, nor quest design, really. While I think that both Ubisoft and FromSoftware are studios with very capable developers and have their own styles in game design, that have their own fans, I think it's, poor form for a developer to take another shot at another developer directly because they're more successful than you, or than you wanted them to be. At the very least, if you're going to bitch about something, you might as well go all in and make YouTube videos about it. That's what us real professionals do anyway. But what I find interesting about these tweets is, there is grains of truth of them. It's like players might not care so much about game UX as some of these developers do. Oftentimes, the user doesn't really even notice what the UX is. They just sort of go in and experience the game. And with the graphics, stability, and performance, I did play the game on PC. However, the stuttering problems were there. It got fixed pretty quickly by the time I started playing it, because it had already been out for a few weeks, and it didn't get in the way of me playing the game. And as far as graphics are concerned, I think it looks beautiful. No, it's not the most photorealistic, amazing graphics, the best graphics I've ever seen from a game, but I did enjoy the graphics. It fit the style really well, and some of the environmental design and just the way the game looks and plays, I really liked. And as far as the criticism about quest design, I found this quest design a breath of fresh air. It wasn't, here's a list of tasks, go and do all of this for me, and then I give you a reward. It was actually fun to stumble upon different NPCs, have them sort of talk to me, and then stumble upon them again in different locations, and I really had to pay attention to what they were saying. And you know what? I found that to be really fun. Is this something that I think every game needs? Absolutely not. But as far as Elden Ring is concerned, I really enjoyed this style of quest design. And I think that different styles of gameplay that exist in other open world games are fun, but it was just as fun in Elden Ring, and they were completely different. And there are a lot of successful open world games that are not at all like Elden Ring, and I'm glad that they exist in contrast to the experience I had. There's a reason different games appeal to me, and why I may want to sit down and, play some Halo or jump into Gears of War, or perhaps even Minecraft. All are different experiences, and I enjoy them all for different reasons. It's no wonder the internet responds to this type of criticizing by memeing the hell out of these developers. There's a few images that, showed what it would be like if companies like Ubisoft made Elden Ring. I think they're spectacular, and they're funny because, they're pretty true. And criticizing Elden Ring for not having what is more traditional UX, UI, or what gamers have come to expect from open world titles just goes to show how out of touch they are when it comes to what gamers want. We want different experiences, and if Elden Ring's success proves anything, it's that there isn't just one formula that works. The more minimalist UX UI of the game has appeal. The game wasn't trying to be like everything else, and good on the developers who didn't try to force it to be like everything else. Perhaps more traditional designs would make the game easier, but that really wasn't the point the developers wanted, was it? We all have different tastes in Elden Ring. You're going to have a much harsher experience, which requires you to fail and fail a lot. The point I'm trying to make is that anyone arguing that Elden Ring isn't for everyone is a poor argument, because no piece of art should be made for everyone. If what Elden Ring has to offer as a game isn't what you want, you don't have to play it. There are plenty of games that don't interest me, and I'm not bitching on Twitter about how terrible their UX UI design is. I chose to learn from my failure as I played this game, to get better at it, because I found immense satisfaction in doing so. I became totally immersed in the lands between, was interested in finding as many side quests and completing their stories without looking up guides. Trust me, I did my fair share of Googling guides and help, especially at the beginning, but as I moved on, I started to do so as sparingly as possible. I wanted to beat the game however I could, and end up spending more time playing Elden Ring than I have with any other game in my life. Previous to my experience with Elden Ring, I rarely spent more than 15 hours playing a game, and most of these games I've beaten take less time than that, on average. But spending over 120 hours in a game that's only been out for 2 months is crazy to me. I even went out and purchased all the other Souls games so I could play them afterwards. I'm glad that Miyazaki and FromSoftware stay true to the style of game they've been crafting for more than a decade, and I look forward to future titles released from the studio. Don't get me wrong, by no means is Elden Ring perfect. I don't think that any work of art is perfect, but in my opinion, art doesn't need to be. I died from so many stupid broken things in the game, and on the other side, I cheesed a great deal of bosses in the game as well. Difficulty was fair and unfair at times, but the experience I had while playing this game was amazing. I had so much fun, and it changed the way I look at gaming in general. I don't think that moving forward I will approach games the same way. I will be more attentive, pay closer attention to the mechanics, stop spamming so many damn buttons, and just launching grenades haphazardly. It's like, I really think that moving forward, my experience in gaming has been changed because of my, the time that I was able to spend playing Elden Ring. The guiding grace of this game comes when you're patient enough to learn how to play it. At first, it was learning to fight my enemies one-on-one when I could, to run away from things that were bigger than me, and to explore the beginning areas of the game. While the game is expansive, there are so many small sections with a handful of enemies that are great tools for teaching. By vanquishing foes in a small area or inside a cave, I was able to get better, and in the case of fighting smaller bosses, gauge my progression on how well I was doing. When a boss kicked my ass a few times, I had to decide if I needed to practice and level my character some more, or if I wasn't paying attention to the attacks well enough to time my own. Some cases, I knew that I had stumbled upon a boss that was beyond my current character's stats, but more frequently, it so happened that by paying closer attention to how the boss moved, attacked, and left itself open for retaliation, I was able to vanquish it. I can't think of another game that has required this level of patience from me, and for some strange reason, I found this to be perhaps the most gratifying gaming experience I've ever had. Sure, it was awesome to beat the original Halo trilogy on Legendary, but I had beat those games so many times before on lower difficulties, it seemed that in most games I play, I can put myself on autopilot and just get right into the action. Don't get me wrong, that is not a criticism of those types of games. In fact, they are oftentimes the best way to relax after a long day of work or just a great way to have fun with friends. For me, I bring this up because I can't think of another game that has really done this for me. It was a new experience that I hadn't expected to like, but ended up falling in love with. It showed me why there are so many passionate fans of Dark Souls games, and why the community is so enthusiastic about defending them. And the final point I wanted to make is game intent over everything. This game is authentic. The studio knows what it's trying to make and doesn't stray from that. For that reason alone, I decided to give the game a try. There are far more experienced players who have made videos defending FromSoftware and their right not to include an easy mode to the game. For the sake of this review, I will defer to their insights and expertise to expand upon this further, and I encourage you to look and see what other people in the community have to say about the topic. And sure, an easy mode may cause more people to try playing the game who might not otherwise, but it seems that when creating entertainment, if you try to compromise and turn away from your core audience to appeal to a wider audience, you end up with neither. I hope that moving forward, FromSoftware continues to make these challenging games and continues to innovate while keeping the core aspects of difficulty and base gameplay the same. I look forward to going back and playing many more hours of Elden Ring, play the new DLC when it comes out, if they release one, and going back and playing the other Souls games. I'm really excited to continue to experience these games. At the end of the day, there's a lot you can praise and a lot you can criticize. No game is perfect, but I'm glad to have experienced Elden Ring and would recommend to people who may be hesitant or have never had interest in this style of game to give it a try. You may be as surprised as I am and find that you love the game as well. And no, it's not for everyone, but it can be enjoyed by anyone. That's the final distinction I wanted to make. Anyone can beat this game who wants to, but not everyone will or even try. Those are my thoughts, as a new player, and thanks for sticking around this long. If you enjoyed the video and would like to see more content, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video, and I'll catch you next time.